think that, we're seeing the incredible shrinking Russian image here. Between that showcase conference he holds every year and the poor attendance by global South nations, also including India and others, and the fact that, he's making a big deal about visiting a pariah in North Korea, indicates, and the fact that he'll be arrested. He couldn't go to the BRICS conference. He couldn't go to the G20 because he faces arrest as a war criminal. I mean, it's the incredible shrinking Putin and his empire that I hope we're seeing, and that seems to be obvious. And he makes a big fanfare and lots of pomp and circumstance and lots of propaganda and rhetoric. But the fact remains that that country is going to go out of business.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. And this time we are catching up with Diane Francis, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She's editor-at-large with the National Post newspaper and has a best-selling Substack with regular updates on geopolitics, including the war in Ukraine and Putin's Russia. Diane, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about your latest article on your Substack in a moment. But first, I wanted to talk about President Putin's first trip to North Korea in more than 2 decades. What are your takeaways from the meeting with Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think that this is a guy who's becoming increasingly reliant to get ammunition and missiles from a country. And he's paying a courtesy call just to make sure that the arrangement continues, and probably that it expands, and possibly also to recruit workers from North Korea to work in the factories in Russia where they have manpower shortages because of the war. And lastly, I think it's also to kind of rattle everybody's cage a little bit, because North Korea is kind of scary, and it makes the whole region in Asia nervous. And so the fact that he sort of gives Kim a laying on of hands and a legitimacy makes him even more scary, and is kind of a rebuke to China, Japan, South Korea, and America.
So they've signed this agreement which provides mutual assistance in the case of aggression against one of the parties. What does that mean in practice? I mean, does it amount to much beyond a pact for paranoid pariahs, or should we be taking it much more seriously?
Well, look, it's a NATO agreement. I mean, NATO has its agreement. An attack on one is an attack on all, with the exception now of Mr. Orban. Apparently, he doesn't have to participate in helping attack people that have been attacked by an enemy. But that aside, it's kind of a standard boilerplate security bilateral, and it's interesting though that he didn't do it right after he went to China. He did it separately because apparently the Chinese said, we don't want to be put on the same level. You do what you want to do, but we don't want it tacked on as though we're equally important. So, I think it's a climb down for Putin. And this is a scourge, this country, North Korea, starves its people. It's an awful place. Hardly a worthy ally.
So is the real concern how much support Putin might offer or feel he has to offer North Korea in terms of missile and nuclear weapons that's supporting that program in return for badly needed ammunition, as you spoke about earlier?
Oh, yeah, he's going to share technology with them. But you've got to remember, too, that there's constraints inside North Korea as to the number of people who can adopt and develop and improve any technology information they're given. I mean, how they have actually been able to develop a nuclear weapon and have missiles that deliver it some distance is quite shocking, given the fact that, the place is a gulag where people are starving. And I just don't know how any of that sort of thing gets done, except to, deny its citizenry and spend all of its money on these military toys.
How worried should South Korea be about this?
Very. That was another message. South Korea has very indirectly become one of the largest providers of ammunition to NATO, the United States, and Ukraine, among the Western Alliance, if I can include them in the Western Alliance, which you can, along with Japan. They are one of the world's biggest artillery makers and munitions makers, and an enormously, enormously powerful and wealthy country that really is that embarrasses or should embarrass North Korea. And so, there's an intense rivalry there. They don't have nuclear weapons, but they have American troops on the ground. And I think they're going to end up with nuclear weapons, frankly, and I think Japan will too.
South Korea has described this whole thing as absurd, and it's complained about the development of this alliance. It's also reported to be considering or threatening even withdrawing the supply of munitions that you mentioned earlier, which could affect Ukraine.
It could affect Ukraine. South Korea is really very much enmeshed in the alliance to contain China and Russia too. Russia's not far away. So I think that what you've got is you've got a pygmy kingdom, which is what North Korea is called, which South Korea would gladly take over and develop, but is at odds with. Just to give you an idea of the difference, it's almost laughable. The GDP of all of North Korea is only 1/4 of the revenues that Samsung, Korea's gigantic electronics firm, makes a year. It's inconsequential, except that he has developed a nuclear bomb, which gives him status.
Let's turn now to your latest piece in your Substack series, and it's looking at something not really reported in the Western media, a Ukrainian special forces attack on Russian mercenaries in the Golan Heights in southwestern Syria. What happened and why were they targeted?
They were targeted because the Ukrainians have been monitoring the Russians wherever they are, and they've around the world, the Wagner mercenaries as well as Russian special forces. And they had noted that increasing numbers, and this is going back for a while, increasing numbers of recruits were being trained, recruits from the Middle East, Africa, wherever, were being trained in Syria by Russians, Russian mercenaries and Russians. And they were given Russian passports and they were shipped up to Ukraine to fight against Ukrainians in the war. And so they were concerned about this. And so they decided to dismantle the training operations, and they pretty much did. And this was a very important and necessary thing to do. But what it opened up my eyes to, and should to the rest of the world, is that Russia is using Syria, which is a failed state. It was absolutely ruined in the civil war that began in 2011. But it occupies a big part of the country, has military bases there. We don't know how many thousands of soldiers, and they're exporting all kinds of terrorism and problems. And the indication was that the Ukrainians had seen that mercenaries in Syria were training before October 7th to attack Israel, told Israel. Israel did not heed the warning, and the rest is history. And so they were doing this to attack a source of training and terrorism coming out of Syria by Russia, and they just wanted to interdict.
And it seems that this attack by Ukrainian special forces was carried out without any complaint from Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president.
I don't know. I don't read his press. I don't even think he has press. Look, it's a failed state. Essentially, in return for getting help from Moscow to fight the democratic forces in Syria in their civil war, he ceded Russia probably, I don't know, a third or half the land. It's a no man's land that Russia occupies, and it uses as a staging ground. It also is now getting into other aspects. It's now moving armaments to Libya. This is its next attempt to move closer and circle Europe, frankly. And they hope to establish a naval base in Libya, where there's a dictator who's kind of out of control. And that's got a lot of people, and should get a lot of people in NATO concerned, because they could attack Europe easily from Libya. That's their next move.
So just how significant is Syria at the moment as a base from which Russia can project power in the region and influence?
I think it's enormously important. I think Ukraine's the first to recognize and do something about it. I think others, the West, Israel for sure, should be getting involved in attacking. But of course, if Israel attacks Syria, then you've got a wider war in the Middle East. However, they are also the Wagner mercenaries are trained there, and they are now positioned in many countries, mostly in French Africa, in the Sahel, where they are stoking insurrections and civil wars. And so it's just a like a node in a metastasis. And that's what they're using it for. And they're exporting trouble, including drugs. They're exporting drugs from there.
And when you mention Russian forces or Russian mercenaries moving into Libya and the threat that it poses to NATO and to European security, can you just describe how you see that threat?
Well, the ISW, the Institute for War, the Institute for Studies in War out of Washington, as well as others, have noted the fact that, Europe, NATO, cannot abide having on its southern flank a naval base with potentially nuclear submarines that could launch nuclear missiles against the southern flank of Europe in Libya. Libya also, they've warned, is a place that is facilitating the weaponization of migration into Europe from African countries. Boatloads of people are leaving from Libya. The Libyan dictator is apparently allowing this or profiting from it. And this is destabilizing to Europe. It's another weapon. And it's something that Russia's used for quite a while. So it really does escalate and extend, shall we say, the war front way beyond Ukraine.
Let's talk now a little bit about China, which was heavily criticised after the G7 summit, where a communique called on Beijing to stop supplying weapons technology to Moscow and oppose China's militarization in the Pacific. Do you think China has any interest in the war ending in Ukraine?
Yes and no. I don't think that China, apart from making some trade benefit, having some trade benefits, and the biggest trade benefit to China is not that they're selling weapons. They're not directly selling weapons. But what they're getting is cheap oil, gobs of cheap oil from Russia, which has been sanctioned from other countries and banned in other countries. So that's helpful. And then with the money that to help pay for the oil that they buy from Russia, they're selling refrigerators and toys and cars and all sorts of things from their manufacturing base. So it's a very beneficial, and their trade benefits far outweigh the benefits that Russia gets selling oil to them. But the oil sales to Russia, to China and India are mostly financing Putin's war, because he can't sell this stuff to Europe any longer. So this is the trade-off. China's playing very carefully, and I've also I really, really believe that China is playing a waiting game, because Russia is weakening itself with this war. It's suicidal economically. They're taking advantage, but they're not going too far. They keep making friendly talks with Europe and America, because that's where their customers are. And so I think China is playing a waiting game, hoping that Russia loses the war and or is defeated. And then it's very possible they can get Manchuria back, which is something that they have long since talked about. 200 years ago, it was swiped from China by a czar, and they want Manchuria back, which includes Vladivostok, by the way.
And we talked about that, didn't we, Diane, last time that we spoke? How would you judge current relations between China and Russia? Because they did not send us, and you wrote about this as well, a significant delegation to the St. Petersburg International Forum, Russia's Davos, which actually coincided with D-Day commemorations. And Putin was saying Russia was fostering an alternative to the American-dominated global financial order. But what did the attendants say about his influence and that alternative?
Well, I think that, we're seeing the incredible shrinking Russian image here. Between that showcase conference he holds every year and the poor attendance by global South nations, also including India and others, and the fact that, he's making a big deal about visiting a pariah in North Korea indicates, and the fact that he'll be arrested. He couldn't go to the BRICS conference. He couldn't go to the G20 because he faces arrest as a war criminal. I mean, it's the incredible shrinking Putin and his empire that I hope we're seeing, and that seems to be obvious. And he makes a big fanfare and lots of pomp and circumstance and lots of propaganda and rhetoric. But the fact remains that that country is going to go out of business.
Because he's wanted by the ICC, but he's able to travel to Vietnam, and that is one of the complaints, I think, perhaps unsaid, about him making these kind of trips at the moment. It kind of normalizes him as a leader, or is that what he's attempting to do, at least?
I think exactly that. I think that's what I am a leader. I have state dinners thrown for me. There's pomp and circumstances. I get to review their troops. I'm a big deal. That's what it is. And he's got to keep that going.
So the G7 summit agreed to release $50 billion worth of profits on frozen Russian assets by way of a loan to Ukraine. And the EU has now agreed a 14th sanctions package against Russia to further deny Russia access to key technologies, strip it of further energy revenues, tackle its shadow fleet and shadow banking network. How much is that going to hurt Putin and his inner circle?
I think that hurts them. The noose is tightening. There's no question. Diplomatically, economically, and militarily, the weapons are flowing. The Ukrainians are doing better. The losses apparently are staggering in Russia. Not that he gives a damn, but the point is that the noose tightens. I think the assets is very important. It's a very important first step, and that, of course, is going to rattle his inner circle, because it was threatened, but they didn't believe they'd do it. And they've kind of done it, but not seizing the assets. They haven't confiscated the assets. And they haven't done that because they don't want to start, creating a precedent where the world doesn't like Americans and they seize American assets inside their country. So that was the reason for that. But this is a blow. And I would like to see the next blow. I would really like to see his oligarchy gone after. I would like to see them harassed and denied visas and stripped of citizenships and, just generally repelled around the world, have their properties seized, have to fight for them in court. I think that they don't have power, but I think that could help rattle the regime in Russia a little bit.
There's also an argument that you could put pressure on Russia into ending the war in Ukraine by putting immediate financial pressure on it, not only in the ways we've just talked about, but enforcing it to pay Ukraine damages. How would that work?
Well, I guess they'd have to just, I don't know the mechanism. I don't know who would be doing the assessments and collections. I guess through the United Nations, which did this before in the Kuwait Iraq situation. The United Nations took over and demanded reparations from Iraq for invading Kuwait and got them, $52 billion. It took time. They set up committees. There's a process. It's all in place. It has to be done through the United Nations. The catch is that the United Nations Security Council policed that reparations collection. And, Putin enjoys a veto. That's another thing that must be addressed. Russia has to be kicked out of the United Nations permanently. No questions asked. Gone.
Let's just return again to the St. Petersburg International Forum, because Putin also said his forces were prevailing on the battlefield in Ukraine. How strong do you think the resolve of NATO allies is now to make sure they don't prevail and that they support Ukraine to deliver a catastrophic defeat to Russia?
I think they're frightened. I think they get it. I think Germany even gets it. Excuse me, Germany is psychiatrically a mess, frankly. I mean, they really don't want to, the word war terrifies them. I mean, it's post-traumatic stress disorder because the war completely destroyed their country and their people and everything they stood for, and nearly ruined the world. So they really avoid it to the best extent they can, but Now they are also starting to pull their weight, certainly financially and also in terms of arms provisions. And Macron has led this. And, he's also got some issues, but that's a different story. The Europeans are very, very strong and, led by the Baltics, Poland, Netherlands, who it looks like is going to provide the next head of NATO, Mark Rutte. And, they're very strong and very supportive. So I think that there's very little chance that the Europeans will wane.
You mentioned Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister, the outgoing Dutch Prime Minister. He is going to be the next NATO Secretary-General with the withdrawal of the only other candidate in the ring, Romanian President Klaus Iohannis. He will take over the job at a crucial time, just over a month before the US presidential elections. Good news, I presume.
It's very good news because Rutte has established himself on the right side of this war. The Netherlands has provided, they've just opened up their arsenals and they're handing over all their F-16s. They have done an enormous job diplomatically and financially to support the cause of fighting Russia. So he will be an appropriate cheerleader to continue that. And I think he will also be a forceful advocate inside the United States.
So, Diane, you write prolifically about geopolitics. I'm just wondering, from your point of view at the moment, what is the thing that is kind of like preoccupying your attention the most? What is the thing that concerns you the most?
Putin. I think Putin is a scourge. I think Putin is the new Hitler. I think Putin lives and breathes and sleeps, dreaming up ways to light fires all over the world, to upset and kill people. He really has to be removed somehow from his job because I think he's a one-off. And I think that there isn't another one in the wings, or I hope. And so I think Putin is the biggest challenge. And then, of course, there are other challenges, such as, climate and economic reform and poverty. But right now, this one gets fixed or the world is in for more and more trouble.
Diane Francis, great to speak to you as ever. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. My thanks to our producers today, Louis Sykes and Morgan Burdick, and for you for watching. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now, or you can listen to Times Radio for the latest news and in-depth analysis, or go to thetimes.co.uk. For now, though, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.